At 4 p.m. on September 15, 1944, Private Bernie Bluestein crouched in the back of a canvas-covered half-track, watching the French countryside blur past through a gap in the fabric. 21 years old, art student from Cleveland, zero combat experience. The convoy was heading east toward Luxembourg, toward the German front line, toward a mission that would either save thousands of American lives or get Bluestein and his unit killed in the most ridiculous way possible. Before we jump into the story, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. You're not just a viewer, you're part of preserving these memories. Share your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. In the trucks around him sat 400 men from the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Artists, designers, sound engineers, actors. Not a single man among them trained for traditional combat. The heaviest weapon they carried was a .50 caliber machine gun. Their real weapons were packed in the trucks behind them. Inflatable tanks, sound effect records, fake radio equipment. Props that looked absurd in daylight, but, from a distance, could pass for an entire armored division. General George Patton's Third Army was attacking the fortress city of Metz, 40 miles south. To mass enough force for that assault, Patton had stripped his northern flank bare, 70 miles of front line. One cavalry squadron, maybe 800 men total holding ground, that should have required 20,000. If the Germans figured out how thin that line was, they'd punch through, wheel south, hit Patton's army from behind, and turn the Third Army's advance into a slaughter. The 23rd's mission was simple in concept, impossible in execution. Impersonate the 6th Armored Division. 8,000 heavily armed troops. Hundreds of tanks. Artillery battalions. Close enough to the German lines that enemy reconnaissance could see them, photograph them, count them. Close enough that if the Germans discovered the deception, those 400 artists and designers would face an armored assault they had no weapons to stop. Bluestein had joined the army to avoid combat. The recruitment notice at the Cleveland Institute of Art had been specific. Camouflage unit. Non-combat role. No fighting. That had sounded perfect. Bluestein wasn't a fighter. He was an artist. He'd spent his teenage years sketching comic strips and pin-up girls, not practicing marksmanship. Now, 6 months after signing up, he understood the truth. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops wasn't a camouflage unit. It was a deception unit. And deception required getting close enough to the enemy for them to see you. Close enough for them to shoot at you. Close enough to die. The convoy crossed into Luxembourg at sunset. Crowds lined the streets of Esch-sur-Alzette, cheering. They'd been liberated 5 days earlier. These people thought the convoy was bringing reinforcements. Real soldiers. Real weapons. They had no idea the trucks were filled with rubber tanks and sound equipment. Bluestein waved to the crowds, felt guilty about it. These people deserved actual protection, not theater. By 8 p.m., the convoy reached the woods near Bettembourg, just north of the village of Abweiler, 12 miles from the German positions along the Moselle River. Close, too close. Bluestein could hear artillery rumbling in the distance. American guns firing at Metz, German guns returning fire. The sound was constant, a low thunder that made the ground vibrate. The truck stopped. Men jumped out. Officers began shouting orders. Bluestein's unit, Company B of the 603rd Camouflage Engineers, had a specific job: deploy 120 inflatable tanks and artillery pieces across 3 square miles of forest. Make it look like Combat Command A of the 6th Armored Division had just arrived to hold the line. They had 6 hours to do it. Before dawn, before German reconnaissance flights spotted them working. Bluestein had inflated dummy tanks before. During training at Fort Meade, they'd practiced the procedure until they could do it in their sleep. Theory was simple. Each inflatable tank came packed in a canvas bag. 4 men could carry it. Attach an air hose. Turn on the compressor. The tank would inflate in 5 minutes. 93 pounds of rubberized canvas, shaped to look like a 30-ton M4 Sherman from 1,000 feet up. Theory was one thing. Reality in a dark forest with German artillery audible in the distance was different. Blustein's team pulled the first dummy tank from its bag at 9:47 p.m. The inflation took 8 minutes instead of 5 because they kept stopping to listen for aircraft. German reconnaissance planes flew at night. If one spotted them inflating rubber tanks, the entire deception would fail before it started. They positioned the first Sherman near the tree line, partially concealed by branches, not perfectly hidden. German observers needed to see it, but not obviously fake. The trick was camouflage that looked like someone tried to hide a real tank but didn't quite succeed. Bluestein added details. Fresh track marks in the mud leading up to the tank position. Scuff marks on trees where a real tank's hull would have scraped bark. A discarded ration tin near the turret. Small things. The kind of debris real tank crews left behind. By midnight, they'd deployed 23 dummy Shermans across half a mile of forest. From the air, in daylight, German reconnaissance would photograph an armored formation. From the ground, German observers across the Moselle would see tank silhouettes among the trees. The illusion would work if nobody got close enough to touch them. But visual deception was only one piece. The Sonic Company was setting up half a mile north. Their job was more complex, more dangerous. Sergeant Harold Dahl commanded a sonic deception platoon. His equipment consisted of 4 trucks, each carrying a 500-pound speaker system and vinyl records of recorded sounds. Tank engines, artillery fire, convoy movements, infantry formations digging in. The recordings had been made at Fort Knox using actual armored divisions. Perfect audio fidelity. From a mile away, you couldn't tell the difference between recorded tank sounds and real ones. Dahl's team positioned their trucks on a ridgeline overlooking the Moselle. The German lines were 800 yards across the river. Close enough that the sonic deception would be perfectly audible. Close enough that German artillery could range those trucks in seconds if they figured out what was happening. At 1 a.m., Dahl played the first recording. Tank engines starting up. The sound rolled across the valley toward the German positions. 40 Sherman engines warming up. The kind of sound an armored unit made when preparing for combat operations. The effect was immediate. German artillery opened fire, not mass fire, probing shots. 3 rounds landed 200 yards from Dahl's position. They were testing, trying to confirm the target. The next salvo would be closer. Dahl shut down the speakers, repositioned his trucks 400 yards south, waited 20 minutes, then played a different recording. Convoy noises. Trucks moving supplies. More artillery followed, but it was targeting the old position. The Germans were chasing ghosts. This would be the pattern for the next 8 nights. Play sounds, draw fire, move. Play more sounds. Keep the Germans convinced that a full armored division was holding this sector. Keep them from probing the line. Keep them from discovering that the actual American presence was 1 understrength cavalry squadron and 400 men with rubber tanks. The third element of the deception was radio. Corporal Charles Williams operated a false radio network from a tent in the woods near Bedamberg. His job required perfect imitation. The 6th Armored Division had specific radio procedures, call signs, authentication codes, traffic patterns. Williams had studied recordings of actual 6th Armored radio operators. He'd learned their rhythm, their slang, the way they pronounced certain words. Now he had to become them. At 2:30 a.m., Williams began transmitting. False traffic, reports of unit movements, supply requests, maintenance issues, routine chatter that any armored division would generate. German signals intelligence was listening. They tracked American radio networks constantly. If Williams made a mistake, if his transmissions didn't match 6th Armored patterns, they'd know something was wrong. Williams transmitted for 45 minutes, then shut down. Radio deception required restraint. Too much traffic looked suspicious. Too little, and the Germans might think the division wasn't really there. The balance was delicate. By dawn on September 16th, the deception was in place. 120 inflatable tanks and artillery pieces. Sonic trucks playing recorded sounds. Radio operators transmitting false traffic. And 400 men waiting to see if the Germans would believe it. If you want to see whether Hitler's best intelligence fell for inflatable tanks and sound effects, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the war. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Bluestein and the Ghost Army. The German response came at 7 a.m. Reconnaissance aircraft. A Fieseler Storch observation plane flying low over the American positions. Bluestein watched it circle twice, photographing the dummy tank formations. The plane was close enough that he could see the pilot's face. Close enough that American anti-aircraft guns could have shot it down easily. But shooting it down would alert the Germans that something important was hidden here. Better to let it take pictures of fake tanks than to reveal real defensive positions by opening fire. The Storch flew away. Bluestein exhaled. First test passed. The inflatable tanks had fooled German aerial reconnaissance. But aerial photos were one thing. Ground observation was different. At 9 a.m., German artillery opened up. Heavy barrage, 88mm guns. The shells came in groups of 4, bracketing the dummy tank positions. Bluestein dove into a foxhole he'd dug the night before. Shrapnel whined overhead. A shell landed 30 yards from one of the inflatable Shermans. The explosion tore a 6-foot hole in the rubber. The tank deflated in 4 seconds, collapsing into a sad heap of canvas. Bluestein's team waited for the barrage to stop. 20 minutes, 47 shells, 3 dummy tanks destroyed. When silence finally returned, they crawled out and assessed damage. The destroyed inflatables had to be fixed or replaced immediately. If German observers spotted deflated rubber tanks, the whole deception would unravel. They pulled patch kits from their supply truck. Standard tire repair equipment, rubber cement, canvas patches. It took 40 minutes to patch the first tank and re-inflate it. By noon, all 3 were back in position, looking from a distance like they'd never been hit. But the artillery barrage told them something critical. The Germans believed the tanks were real. They were trying to destroy an armored division. That meant the deception was working. It also meant the next 8 days would be dangerous. The pattern repeated for a week. German reconnaissance flights, artillery barrages, sonic trucks playing recorded sounds at night, radio operators transmitting false traffic, and Bluestein's team maintaining the illusion, patching damaged inflatables, adding fresh camouflage, making sure every detail stayed perfect. The cavalry squadron holding the real line appreciated what the 23rd was doing. Colonel James Polk commanded the 3rd Cavalry Squadron. His 800 men were spread across 70 miles. Polk knew that without the Ghost Army's deception, his position was hopeless. German intelligence would spot the gap. They'd attack. His cavalry would be overrun in hours. Polk wrote to his wife on September 18th. He couldn't explain the situation explicitly. Censors would delete anything sensitive, but his frustration showed through. I have command of the damnedest army that has ever gotten together. I wish I could tell you about it. It is absolutely crazy. General Patton knew about the Ghost Army. He'd been briefed on their capabilities in August. Some generals resented the deception unit. They thought warfare should be straightforward, honest. Patton disagreed. He embraced any tactic that saved American lives and killed Germans. When he learned the 23rd was holding part of his line with inflatable tanks, he wrote to his wife, "There is one rather bad spot in my line, but I don't think the Huns know it. By tomorrow night I will have it plugged. Holding it now by the grace of God and a lot of guts." Patton was right about the guts. On September 19th, German infantry probed the American line. 2 companies, maybe 300 men. They approached the woods near Bettemberg where the inflatable tanks were positioned. If they got close enough to see the deception, if they realized those were rubber dummies, they'd call in a full assault. The 23rd had 1 platoon of real infantry. 40 men from the 406th Combat Engineers. Their job was security. Perimeter defense. They weren't supposed to fight major engagements. They were just supposed to keep German patrols from stumbling onto the inflatable equipment. The German patrol got within 400 yards of the dummy tanks before the 406th opened fire. 30 caliber machine guns. Rifles. Enough firepower to sound like a company-sized defensive position. The Germans took casualties, retreated, called for artillery support. Shells rained down on the woods. More inflatable tanks were destroyed. More patches had to be applied. But the engagement proved something. German infantry believed they'd run into a real armored division. They didn't probe further. They reported to their command that the American line was strongly held. That report saved Patton's flank. By September 21st, the 23rd had held the position for 6 days. The strain was showing. Men were exhausted. They'd been under intermittent artillery fire for a week. 3 soldiers had been wounded by shrapnel. None killed, but the psychological pressure was intense. They were actors playing a role where mistakes meant death. Bluestein spent his downtime sketching. He'd brought a small notebook and pencils. Between inflating tanks and dodging artillery, he drew what he saw. The forest, the destroyed equipment, the faces of other soldiers. Art was his way of processing the stress. Years later, he'd still have those sketches. Proof that even in combat, even performing an absurd deception mission, Artists kept creating. On September 22nd, relief arrived. The 83rd Infantry Division. Real soldiers, real weapons. They'd finally been released from other operations to plug the gap in Patton's line. The Ghost Army could withdraw, but the withdrawal had to maintain the deception. If the Germans saw the 6th Armored Division suddenly disappear, they'd realize something was wrong. So, the sonic trucks played one last recording. The sound of tanks moving out, convoy noises, the recorded sounds of an armored division relocating to a different sector. The inflatable tanks were deflated quickly, packed into trucks, driven away under cover of darkness. By dawn on September 23rd, the 23rd was gone. The 83rd Infantry was in position. The Germans never knew the difference. The operation was judged a complete success. Patton's attack on Metz had continued without German interference from the north. The Third Army's flank had held. American casualties were minimal. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops had proven their concept. Deception worked. Inflatable tanks worked. Theater worked. But Operation Betemborg was just the beginning. The Ghost Army would conduct 20 more deception missions over the next 8 months. Each one more ambitious. Each one saving more lives. The Ghost Army story actually began 11 months earlier, in October 1943, in a planning office in London. Major Ralph Ingersoll was a celebrity journalist. Before the war, he'd worked as managing editor of The New Yorker, publisher of Fortune magazine, founder of the New York newspaper, PM. When war broke out, he joined up, served in North Africa, written a best-selling book about his experiences. By late 1943, he was assigned to Special Plans Branch at Army Headquarters in London, working with British planners on strategic deception. The British had perfected tactical deception at El Alamein in 1942. Operation Bertram had used dummy tanks and fake supply depots to convince German commander Erwin Rommel that the British attack would come from the south when it actually came from the north. The deception had worked perfectly. British forces broke through German lines, routed Rommel's Afrika Korps, turned the tide of the North African campaign. Ingersoll studied the British methods. He believed the same tactics could work in Europe. But the British approach was static. Deceptions tied to specific locations. Ingersoll envisioned something mobile. A traveling deception unit that could move with advancing armies, creating false impressions wherever needed. He partnered with Colonel Billy Harris, a British liaison officer. Together, they drafted a proposal, a self-contained American deception unit, 1,100 men. Artists, designers, engineers, sound technicians, radio operators, equipped with inflatable tanks and vehicles, sound reproduction equipment, and radio gear, capable of simulating 2 full divisions, approximately 30,000 men. The proposal was audacious. It violated traditional military thinking. American commanders believed in straightforward application of overwhelming force. Deception felt dishonest, un-American. But Ingersoll argued that deception saved lives. Every German soldier fooled by fake tanks was a German soldier not shooting at real Americans. The proposal reached General Jake Devers, deputy commander of U.S. forces in Europe. Devers approved it. On January 20th, 1944, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was officially activated. Colonel Harry Reeder took command. Recruitment began immediately. The Army needed specific skills. Not traditional combat soldiers, artists who could create convincing camouflage, sound engineers who could operate complex audio equipment, radio operators who could mimic other units' communication patterns, actors who could play roles convincingly. Recruitment focused on art schools, advertising agencies, design studios, theater companies. The notice was deliberately vague. Camouflage unit, special assignment. Recruits didn't learn the truth until after they signed up and completed basic training. Bluestein saw the notice at the Cleveland Institute of Art in March 1943. He was 19, studying industrial design. The draft was coming. He'd be called up eventually. Might as well volunteer for something that sounded safe. Camouflage work. Non-combat. Perfect. After signing up, he was sent to Fort George Meade in Maryland for basic training, standard infantry instruction, marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, field exercises. Bluestein hated it. He wasn't a natural soldier. He was clumsy with weapons, uncomfortable with violence, but he got through it. Then came specialized training. That's when he learned the truth. This wasn't a camouflage unit. It was a deception unit. They'd be creating fake military installations, impersonating real combat units, operating close to enemy lines. The mission was creative. It was also dangerous. Training took place at Pine Camp, New York. The 23rd learned to inflate dummy tanks, operate sonic equipment, maintain false radio networks. They practiced coordination. Visual, sonic, and radio deception had to work together seamlessly. If one element failed, the entire illusion would collapse. They learned that inflatable tanks required constant maintenance, patches, reinflation, repositioning. They learned that sonic trucks had to be mobile. German artillery would target sound sources. They learned that radio operators had to be perfect. One wrong call sign, one incorrect authentication code, and enemy signals intelligence would know something was wrong. By May 1944, the 23rd was ready. They shipped to England, arrived shortly before D-Day. Their first mission would be supporting the invasion. Operation Quicksilver was the code name. The Ghost Army's role was minor but important. They helped create the impression that a massive invasion force was assembling near Dover, threatening the Pas de Calais. This false threat drew German attention away from Normandy, where the real invasion would occur. The deception worked. German intelligence believed the Dover force was real. They kept divisions at Pas de Calais for weeks after D-Day, waiting for a second invasion that never came. Those divisions might have reinforced Normandy, might have pushed Allied forces back into the sea. Instead, they sat idle, fooled by inflatable tanks and fake radio traffic. After D-Day, the Ghost Army moved to France. Their mission was ongoing. Follow the Allied advance, create deceptions wherever needed. Keep German intelligence confused about American strength and dispositions. Operation Brittany came in July. The 23rd helped deceive Germans about where General Patton's Third Army was heading. The deception allowed Patton to race across France faster than German commanders anticipated. Hundreds of miles gained. Thousands of German soldiers captured, all because enemy intelligence was looking in the wrong direction. September brought Operation Bettenberg, 8 days holding a 70-mile gap in Patton's line. Then came Operation Kodak in December during the Battle of the Bulge. Radio-only deception. No visual elements, just false transmissions drawing German attention away from Bastogne, where American forces were surrounded, and Patton was racing north to relieve them. Each operation refined their techniques. They learned what worked, what didn't. They learned that German intelligence was good but not perfect. Germans believed what they wanted to believe. Show them a concentration of tanks, they'd assume a major offensive was coming. Show them radio traffic from a division headquarters. They'd assume that division was in the area. The human mind filled in gaps, created patterns, saw what it expected to see. The Ghost Army exploited those cognitive biases ruthlessly. But their greatest mission was yet to come. March. The war was entering its final phase. Allied forces had pushed Germany back to the Rhine River. Crossing the Rhine was the last major obstacle before driving into Germany's heartland. The Ninth Army would make the main crossing at Wesel. But German forces were concentrated there. Heavy defenses, the crossing would be costly, unless the Germans could be drawn away. Operation Viersen was conceived as the Ghost Army's largest, most complex deception. The mission: convince German intelligence that the main Rhine crossing would occur 10 miles south of Wesel, near the town of Viersen. Draw German forces there. Let the Ninth Army cross at Wesel with reduced opposition. To pull it off, the 23rd would simulate 2 entire divisions, the 30th and 79th Infantry, approximately 40,000 men. It would require every deception technique they developed: visual, sonic, radio, and special effects. It would require coordination with real army units who'd help sell the illusion. It would require near-perfect execution. The operation began March 18th. The Ghost Army moved into position near Viersen. They deployed more than 600 inflatable tanks and artillery pieces, more than they'd ever used before. From the air, from German observation posts across the Rhine, it looked like a massive force was assembling. Sonic trucks operated around the clock, construction sounds during the day, pontoon bridge assembly, engineering equipment, tank movements at night, convoy traffic, the sounds of an army preparing for a major river crossing. Radio operators transmitted constant traffic. division headquarters, regiment command posts, battalion operations centers, thousands of messages creating the impression of massive troop concentrations. The 23rd also employed special effects teams. They set off flash canisters at night to simulate artillery fire. They burned fuel to create smoke screens like real chemical units used. They even had officers wear general stars and walk around local towns, visible to potential German spies, creating the impression that high-ranking commanders were present. The deception required help from real combat units. Actual bridging engineers assembled some real bridge sections near the Ghost Army's position. Real artillery fired a few shells. The combination of real and fake elements made the deception impossible to detect. German response confirmed the deception was working. Artillery fire increased dramatically. German batteries across the Rhine targeted the Ghost Army's positions. Hundreds of shells, but the only casualties were inflatable tanks. Men scrambled to patch them, re-inflate them, keep the illusion intact. German radio intercepts indicated they were moving reinforcements to Viersen. Multiple divisions, heavy armor, exactly what Allied intelligence wanted. Every German soldier defending against the fake crossing was a German soldier not defending against the real crossing at Wesel. On March 23rd, the 9th Army crossed the Rhine at Wesel. Opposition was lighter than expected. German forces were concentrated 10 miles south, waiting for an attack that would never come. The crossing succeeded with remarkably low casualties. Thousands of American lives saved because German intelligence had been fooled by inflatable tanks and sound effects. After the crossing, captured German maps showed their assessment of American positions. They had the 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions marked exactly where the Ghost Army had portrayed them. German intelligence had bought the deception completely. Operation Viersen was the Ghost Army's final major mission. By April, German resistance was collapsing. The deception unit wasn't needed anymore. The war in Europe ended May 8th. The 23rd returned to the United States in July, was deactivated September 15th. But their story remained classified. Every man who served in the Ghost Army had signed secrecy oaths. They couldn't talk about what they'd done, not to family, not to friends, not to anyone. The Army wanted to preserve the possibility of using similar deception units in future conflicts. If the Soviets learned detailed American deception techniques, those techniques would become useless. Bluestein went home to Cleveland, returned to the Cleveland Institute of Art, graduated in 1947, started a career as an industrial designer, married Marcella Boehm in 1949, had 2 children. For 50 years, when people asked what he'd done in the war, he said, camouflage work, that was all. His family never knew the truth. The Ghost Army remained classified until 1996. Only then could veterans finally tell their stories. By then, most Americans had forgotten about World War II deception operations. The stories sounded unbelievable. Inflatable tanks, sound effect records, impersonating entire divisions. It sounded like a comedy routine, not a military operation. But the military records proved it was real and effective. A 1945 Army analysis concluded, rarely, if ever, has there been a group of such a few men which had so great an influence on the outcome of a major military campaign. Estimates vary, but military historians credit the Ghost Army with saving between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives. Every deception that drew German forces away from real attacks. Every operation that made enemy commanders hesitate or redeploy. Every mission that created confusion in German intelligence networks. All of it contributed to reducing American casualties. The unit's official casualties were remarkably low. 3 men killed in action, approximately 30 wounded. For a unit that spent nearly a year operating close to enemy lines, often within artillery range, those numbers were extraordinary. Perhaps it was because the Germans targeted fake equipment instead of real soldiers. Perhaps it was luck. Either way, the Ghost Army proved that deception could be both effective and relatively safe. After declassification, interest in the Ghost Army slowly grew. Rick Baer, a filmmaker and historian, made a PBS documentary in 2013. He co-authored a book with Elizabeth Sales in 2015. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans created a traveling exhibit. The story finally received the recognition it deserved. By then, most Ghost Army veterans had died. In 2022, only 9 remained alive. That year, after nearly a decade of lobbying by families and historians, Congress passed the Ghost Army Congressional Gold Medal Act. President Joe Biden signed it into law. On March 21, 2024, 3 surviving Ghost Army veterans attended the medal ceremony at the U.S. Capitol. Bernie Bluestein, age 100, from Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Seymour Nussenbaum, age 100, from Monroe Township, New Jersey. John Chrisman, age 99, from Leesburg, New Jersey. They accepted the Congressional Gold Medal on behalf of all 1,100 men who served in the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops and 3,133rd Signal Service Company. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, presented the medals. He called the Ghost Army one of the most successful counterintelligence operations in human history. Secretary of the Army, Christine Wormuth, noted that modern military deception techniques still build on Ghost Army methods. "We are still learning from your legacy," she said. Bluestein, in a wheelchair, looked at the medal and said what he'd been saying for years. "We never thought of it being an astounding thing. We sacrificed by putting ourselves next to inflatable tanks and saying, 'Hey, shoot at us.' We saved 30,000 lives." The medal design shows Ghost Army soldiers conducting their operations. One transmitting deceptive radio signals, others checking equipment, moving inflatable tanks. The reverse shows the unit patches and locations where they served. France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Germany. Bernie Bluestein died later in 2024, months after receiving the medal. He was one of the last survivors. By early 2025, only a handful remained. Soon, there would be none. The Ghost Army would pass from living memory into history books, but the legacy endures. Modern military doctrine includes deception as a core element. Every branch of the U.S. military studies Ghost Army operations. The techniques they pioneered, visual deception, sonic deception, radio deception, coordinated multimedia operations, remain relevant today, adapted for modern technology. The inflatable tanks are gone. None survive. They were recycled after the war, used in training exercises until they wore out, but photographs remain. Grainy black and white images of soldiers lifting what looks like a 30-ton Sherman tank over their heads. It's absurd. It's also brilliant. That combination of absurdity and brilliance defined the Ghost Army. They proved that war wasn't just about firepower and courage. It was about creativity, psychology, theater, making the enemy see what you wanted them to see, making them believe lies, making them waste resources fighting phantoms while real attacks succeeded elsewhere. 1,100 men. 21 major operations, 8 months in combat, 30,000 lives saved, all with rubber tanks, sound effects, and imagination. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about soldiers who won battles with creativity instead of bullets. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure the Ghost Army doesn't disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.